So today we're going to continue with the two witnesses, part 5. And somebody said, how many sections of this do you have? And I said, well, there are 11. Really? And so they were kind of surprised that I was going to drag this out and milk it this long, but it's an hour at a time. It's not too much to ask, and it is kind of interesting, and hopefully it'll be beneficial to you as time unfolds here. In the last study, we talked about the events that would take place during the time that the two witnesses are giving God's message. At that time, we focused on the fact that the beast will be in Jerusalem. The Middle East will have been conquered by the beast or the king of the north. The mark of the beast will be being enforced, and the result will be God's church will be persecuted. The scattered church that is left will, they'll come after them and seek to basically challenge them by saying you either accept the mark of the beast or else. Jerusalem will be trampled by the Gentiles, and they will be there until Christ returns. The man of sin is in place speaking blasphemies against God and speaking pompous words, as it says in the book of Daniel. The church at that particular time will not be visible in the sense that it will be carrying on a work at that time. You work while you can, but it appears that the forces of evil are going to be mounted against the church where it can't work in an organized way. It appears, so who will be carrying on God's work and preaching? It'll be the two witnesses. They will be the ones who will be God's representatives, and we're just not going to have the freedom that we have today. And you can see things moving in that direction, where things are moving to where you're not going to have the freedom that you've enjoyed up to this point. There will come a day when we won't be able to gather here or any place. Or if we do, it'll be on the sly. And there will come a day when we aren't going to be able to go to the feast. So these years when we're able to go up to the feast, then we need to rejoice in it and thank God that the doors are still open. And we do live in a time of unprecedented freedom, and we need to thank God for that. So the church is still able to do a work, so we continue to do it as much as we can. The beast isn't there. The false prophet isn't there. We still have freedom, so while we do have those things, then it's our job to go to the world and preach the gospel and share it as far as wide and as wide as possible. Like I talked about in the sermon, the world, what's going to come upon the world is going to come upon them as a thief in the night. It is going to surprise them. They're not going to be ready for it. We can be ready for it, but they're not going to be. So it always is in my mind, people are just going about their business. It talks about, as in the time of Noah, everybody's going to be buying and selling and marrying and giving in marriage and all of the normal things of everyday life. And that's the way it was up until the time of the flood. They didn't expect the flood. They expected this crackpot Noah didn't know what he was talking about, and life was just going to go on as it always had. And then the rain started, and the ark was closed, and they're all thinking, maybe he knew more than we gave him credit for, and hey, how about letting us on that ship? And the boat had sailed. It was too late for them. So we have the opportunity to preach the gospel. That's what part of that we will be doing next week. We have 20 people signed up to come, so 20 people is better than no people, so pray that God would bless our efforts and that the church would grow and God would add to it, and that we would gain greater understanding of, be able to share the understanding that we have of God's truth with others. So let's begin in Revelation chapter 11. Revelation chapter 11. And what is surprising through all this is that you come to see, boy, there's more information about that relates to the two witnesses than we ever thought possible. Revelation 11, as we've seen in verse 1, that God is measuring, and I think he is measuring the church right now. He's measuring you and me, and knowing that he's doing that, then we need to take that into account in how we live and what's important to us so that we do measure up and that we are prepared for what is coming ahead. We looked at verse 2, and we've talked about the court of the Gentiles is left out. And that's because God is going to be focused upon his church. He's not going to be calling new people into to the church at that time. He's going to allow the Gentiles to run rampant. And basically, the Gentile nations have been represented by various beasts. And the beast will basically run wild for a period of time until God says that's enough of it, and brings it all to a halt with the coming of Jesus Christ. They're going to trample the holy city underfoot for 42 months. Then it says in verse 3, "And I will give power to my 2 witnesses." So during this 42 months, 1,260 days, 3.5 years, God will give power to my 2 witnesses. It does not say power in the Scriptures, but it can be inferred because God does give them protection, and God does give them the power to call down fire from heaven. So I would say that is power that God does give to them. "I will give power to my 2 witnesses, and they will prophesy 1,260 days, clothed in sackcloth." And interestingly, they have to begin 3 days before it all comes to a close. They have to begin 3 days before the 1,260 days is going to start at a certain point, and they have to begin at day 1,263. If they're going to do the 1,260 days, they die 3 days before it's all over. So they got to start a little early, at least a few days anyway, it would seem. So we see that power is given to them. It's not, as I said, it's not actually in the text. And it tells us something interesting here, that they're going to preach for this period of time, and they'll be clothed in sackcloth. Now, what's sackcloth? Some of you, how many of you are old enough to remember what sackcloth is? How many of you have had a garment? Some of ladies maybe have had a garment made of, a dress made of sackcloth. Any of you have a dress made of sackcloth? Basically, you used to be able to buy, for all of those who are younger, used to be able to buy flour in sacks. And these were cloth sacks. You didn't have them in the paper sacks like you do now. They were cloth, and they were quite bright. The colors were bright on the inside of those bags, so once you used the flour, you could wash that sack, and you could use it to make a dress. And so I had, my aunts had dresses made out of sackcloth. And my grandmother, once they no longer used them, took the sackcloth, and she made a what's it called? Not a blanket, but a quilt. There you go, a quilt. It's sad. How sad. Anyway, a quilt. And we still have the quilt, and so it has a certain value because they were dresses that my mom and my aunts wore, back in the tough times of the Depression and all of that. And those who are older can remember some of those experiences. You were just fortunate to have a dress, and yes, it was sackcloth, but you know what? Everybody else probably had a sackcloth dress that had a dress, and they were quite colorful and pretty. And so my quilt looks something like very bright and beautiful, and something that I can always remember my aunts and my mom by. But that's what we would be used to today. If you went back in their time, when you talk about sackcloth, you're talking about something that was made from the goats, hair of the goats, long hair of the goats. It's called a mohair. Some of you may be familiar with a mohair suit. And anyway, they had, it was mohair, and it was thick, it was dense. And this sackcloth was used for straining, for sacks, and for mourning garments. So it was kind of a rough type of cloth, kind of like a burlap. It was not real comfortable. So as you look at, is this just speaking figuratively, that these individuals are going to be dressed in sackcloth? I would say that if they are actually dressed in sackcloth, then they're going to stand out. And when we look at the 2 witnesses, not a one of them has walked up in sackcloth. So will they be dressed in sackcloth? I guess if we see some people appearing in sackcloth and start preaching something that has the ring of truth, I bet these are the guys. So we'll see what happens as time goes along. But it says they're going to be dressed in sackcloth. And so that's probably going to be something that would designate them as that we would look for as we're looking for the two witnesses. Now, to understand about these two witnesses, we need to understand what the next verse is talking about. And that's going to be the focus of where we're at today. It says in verse 4, "These are the two olive trees." So it compares the two witnesses to two olive trees. And the two lampstands standing before the God of the earth. So it ties the two witnesses in with two olive trees and two lampstands who stand before the God of the earth. So where do we get more information about these two olive trees and these two lampstands? Where do we go for that information? Well, we're going to have to look in the Bible, and we need to let the Scriptures reveal something about the two olive trees and the two lampstands. So let's begin in Isaiah chapter 41. Isaiah chapter 41. Isaiah 41, verse 20. So God is going to do certain things as he sets up his kingdom, and it says that they may see and know and consider and understand together that the hand of the Lord has done this, and the Holy One of Israel has created it. And he goes on to say, "Present your case, says the Lord. Bring forth your strong reasons, says the King of Jacob. Let them bring forth and show us what will happen. Let them show the former things that they were, that we may consider them and know the latter end of them, or declare to us things to come." He says, show things that are to come hereafter, that we may know that you are gods. Yes, do good or do evil, that we may be dismayed and see it together. The way we know what's going to happen in the future is to consider the former things, to think about the earlier examples, to think about the antitypes, the types that come before, to show the pattern that's gone before, because it helps us to understand the pattern that will unfold. So our job is to consider the former things that God has brought to pass so that we can understand what is going to come to pass in the future, because it helps us to understand the way God works. And God, as one of the things that we've come to realize, Liz and I, as we've studied over the last few years, is God works according to patterns. And he's consistent. God is consistent in those patterns. So when you begin to understand certain patterns, and then you can begin to see more the way things work as far as God working out his plan. The events to come will follow the template that was played out in the past. And therefore, by looking at the past, we can see the template and see the pattern of how things will work out. For instance, Israel and Judah fell, didn't they? They fell for a specific reason, because of sin. They were warned not to go down that path of sin. Specifically, God told them in Leviticus and in Deuteronomy, don't go there, don't do this. If you honor me and you keep my commandments, you will be blessed, and if you don't, you will be cursed. They did not follow the path that God laid out for them, and they were cursed. So that happened back with ancient Israel and Judah. Do you think that God has changed his pattern? Ultimately, there will be a day when that pattern will play itself out once again. So God has patterns. That's not the only one, but he has a pattern that he works in. And what we can do as we study the Bible is seek to understand what those patterns are. So the two olive trees, where do we find information about them? Well, they're described for us in the book of Zechariah. They're described in the book of Zechariah. They are typed in Joshua, who was the high priest in that time. He was the religious leader. And Zerubbabel, who was a descendant of David and who was the political leader. Those two are called the olive trees that stand before God, Joshua and Zerubbabel. And we need to understand the life story of Zerubbabel and Joshua before we can understand some things about the two olive trees and what their purpose was. So we have to understand some of this background before we move on to the book of Zechariah and what's played out there. So to understand this background, we have to go all the way back to Jerusalem in 586 BC. This is the time in which Jerusalem fell to Babylon in 586 BC. The ruler of Babylon at that time was Nebuchadnezzar. He's the conqueror of the city of Jerusalem and all of Judea. And the Babylonians concluded that the temple was a problem. It was a problem in which the people of Judah would rally around the temple and constantly rebel. So their conclusion was, we're going to stop this and get rid of the temple. And that's what they did. So they destroyed it. They destroyed the temple, and they took the temple implements and treasures to Babylon and locked them away. So they conquered the people of Judah, the city of Jerusalem. They destroyed the temple and carried away all of the implements and the gold and the silver and everything that was involved there at the temple. When Babylon fell to the Medes and Persians in 539 BC, the vault holding the riches of the temple and its implements had been opened. So they had stayed in storage until the king of Babylon, known as Belshazzar, had a great party. So he and all of the nobles of Babylon are partying, having a great time, and he decides, hey, I'm so great and so powerful and so wonderful, forgetting the example of his grandfather, Nebuchadnezzar, and he says, go get those implements of the temple. Our gods are superior to their gods, and we'll just show you how superior they are. So they brought them out and began drinking from them, and that just happened to be the time when God said, well, that's it for you. And Belshazzar sees the finger writing on the wall, many, many tekel upharsin. And in that very night, the city of Babylon fell. 539 BC, conquered by the Medes and Persians. God said that it would, after the fall of the city of Jerusalem, God said it would be 70 years that Judah would be in captivity, and then God would bring them back. God told the people of Judah through Jeremiah and Ezekiel that after 70 years they would be allowed to return to the Holy Land and rebuild the temple. So let's go to Ezra chapter 1. Ezra chapter 1. They would have the chance to rebuild, to reestablish the people of God in the land of promise, to once again have a temple, a place of worship, to once again to be able to honor God as they had up until the time of the captivity. Ezra chapter 1. Verse 1. Here it says, now in the first year of Cyrus, king of Persia, that the word of the Lord by the mouth of Jeremiah might be fulfilled, the Lord stirred up the spirit of Cyrus, king of Persia, so that he made a proclamation throughout all his kingdom and also put it in writing. So a proclamation was given in the first year of Cyrus, king of Persia. And what brought this about? How did the Lord stir up the spirit of Cyrus, king of Persia? How did that come about? Did he appear to Cyrus at night in a vision, or did he have a bad dream? That's not how it happened, and we can find the answer to this in the Scriptures. The answer is given to us in the Scriptures, as I said, and Cyrus was given a scroll of the prophet Isaiah, which contained chapter 44. And Isaiah wrote his book around 820 BC. And the scroll would have been kept in the temple vault where all the scrolls were kept, and would have been kept by the Jews as they went over to Babylon in the captivity of 586 BC and before. So the priests were able to take the scrolls of God's word with them. They were able to take them over to Babylon, and they had them there with them. And they were able to make copies of the Old Testament scrolls with them and while they were there in captivity. So they had this 250-year-old book written by Isaiah with them by the time Cyrus came on the scene. So they had this book. They were still continuing to try to worship God as best they could under the circumstances. When Cyrus conquered Babylon, Josephus mentions that the scroll of Isaiah was given to him to read. So Cyrus conquers Babylon, and he is given the scroll of Isaiah to read. Who do you think very possibly gave him that scroll? It's probably the prophet Daniel. Daniel was well aware of the prophecies of Ezekiel and Jeremiah. In fact, as you look through the book of Daniel, he's praying to God that God would fulfill his promise to allow them to return to rebuild the temple. That's part of the book of Daniel. So since that was on his mind and he was beseeching God, do you think that maybe he thought, maybe I should share this scroll with Cyrus, which contains chapter 44? So he probably mentioned to Cyrus that, you know what, your name is in this scroll. And I'm sure that Cyrus, being a Persian, who cares about this scroll? But it does mention my name, huh? So he was probably intrigued with that. So let's go to chapter 44 of Isaiah and look at verse 27. Isaiah 44, verse 27. Now you have to realize, as we're reading this, that Babylon was a vast city, and the Euphrates River passed through the city. And where the river passed through the city, you had these great iron gates that protected the city. So the water passed underneath these gates, and you really couldn't get in there because the water's running under the gates, and it was difficult to get into the city. And the city was basically impregnable. So it says in verse 27, "Who says to the deep, 'Be dry,' and I will dry up your rivers?" How did Cyrus get into the city of Babylon? He diverted the Euphrates River into a lake, and the river stopped running through Babylon, and all that his troops had to do was go under the great gates and enter the city. So you have this statement, "Who says to the deep, 'Be dry,' and I will dry up your rivers?" Who says of Cyrus, "He is my shepherd"? He was God's shepherd in the sense that he wanted him to perform certain things on his behalf. "And he shall perform all my pleasure, saying to Jerusalem, 'You shall be built.' And to the temple, 'Your foundation shall be laid.'" Here is a pagan king who knows nothing about the true God, or very little about the true God, and here is God naming him in 820 BC, when the book of Isaiah was written, around that time. And what time is it here? It's 538 BC. A lot of time has passed, and here is this scroll being read 250 years later. Now that's an amazing thing, where you can name this king that ultimately is going to read this passage and read about himself here, and God's Spirit is going to move him to allow Judah to return and rebuild the city. Only God can see the end from the beginning. We can't. So God told Cyrus what he was going to do. "I want you to rebuild Jerusalem and the temple." Chapter 45, verse 1. "Thus says the Lord to his anointed, to Cyrus, whose right hand I have held, to subdue nations before him and loose the armor of kings, to open before him the double doors." A reference to the city of Babylon. "And so that the gates will not be shut. I will go before you and make the crooked places straight. I will break in pieces the gates of bronze and cut the bars of iron. I will give you the treasures of darkness." When did Cyrus enter the city? They diverted the rivers, They diverted the river, and then they entered by night. So there's this great party going on in the city of Babylon, which seems foolish. Why would you be having this party when the Medes and Persians have surrounded your city? But they figured, we've got plenty of food. We don't have to worry about anything. Nobody's going to bother us. So a lot of pride being exercised here. And so God said, well, we'll see if your pride bears out here. And it didn't. God allowed them to fall. So I will give you the treasures of darkness. So under cover of dark, they entered the city and were able to make off with all the treasures of Babylon. And hidden riches of secret places, that you may know that I, the Lord, who call you by your name, am the God of Israel. So he was able to conquer the city, and God names him specifically. So if you're this pagan ruler and you see this scroll from far in the past and you read your own name in it, predicting what you're going to do, I'm sure you would be impressed. Verse 4, for Jacob my servant's sake and Israel my elect, I have even called you by your name. I have named you, though you have not known me. I am the Lord, and there is no other. There is no God besides me. I will gird you, though you have not known me, that they may know from the rising of the sun to its setting, that there is none besides me. I am the Lord, and there is no other. I form the light and create darkness. I make peace and create calamity. I, the Lord, do all these things. So then, when this was either read by Cyrus or read to him, he recognized something significant going on here, and he was willing to do what God wanted him to do. He was willing to make the decree that was going to be made in order that the people of Judah could return and begin rebuilding. Let's go back to Ezra once again, the book of Ezra, chapter 1. Ezra chapter 1, verse 2. So we move on here, and it says, thus says Cyrus, king of Persia, all the kingdoms of the earth the Lord of heaven has given me, and he has commanded me to build him a house at Jerusalem, which is in Judah. So he asked who would go up to rebuild the house, to rebuild the city, and he authorized it to be done. Verse 3, who would go up, and then verse 4, and whoever is left in any place where he dwells, let the men of this place help him with silver and gold, with goods and livestock, besides the freewill offerings of the house of God, which is in Jerusalem. So the call went out for those who would be willing to go back, and those who were not willing to return, that they would help those returning to the city of Jerusalem. So the next chapter and a half pretty much just covers the names of the people who went back to the land of Judea to rebuild Jerusalem and the temple. So let's pick up the story in chapter 3, verse 1. Ezra chapter 3, verse 1. And when the 7th month had come, so what takes place in the 7th month according to God's calendar? It's the month of the holy days. It's the month that will begin on the Feast of Trumpets, the first day of the month there, the first day of the 7th month. And so it's the 7th month when the children of Israel were in the city, so they had come back, and it was the 7th month, and the people gathered together as one man to Jerusalem. So they've returned. It's the 7th month, the time of the holy days, and they return as one man to Jerusalem. Verse 2, then Joshua, the son of Jozadak, and his brethren, the priest, and Zerubbabel, the son of Shealtiel, and his brethren, arose and built the altar of God, the God of Israel, to offer burnt offerings on it, as it is written in the law of Moses, the man of God. And what's interesting here is they haven't rebuilt the temple yet, but they do build an altar, and they begin making offerings to God. So they begin offering the morning and evening sacrifices, and for the Jews this was significant because it represents the opportunity for them to have a central place of worship to reestablish their connection with God in their homeland and to begin to have a steady pattern of a relationship with God. That's why, as you look at the Jews today, they would like to build an altar and begin the morning and evening sacrifices, if they could. That's something that's a very strong desire among a certain element of the Jews. So this was a reconnection with God. It identified them as a nation, and we see this very same thing today. So we, as we look at our lives and we think about the temple, where is the temple today? We've covered this. Where is the temple today? There is no physical temple. Will there be a physical temple built? I don't know. I would say that probably there will be at least an altar built. And because there is no need to build the temple at this point from God's perspective, because the temple already exists. It is a spiritual temple. We are the temple of God. Individually, if God's Spirit dwells in us, we are the temple of God, and we are the temple of God collectively. We are the temple of God. So they may rebuild the temple. I would say they're going to rebuild an altar, but the temple of God already exists, and that's where God is most focused at this particular time. So chapter 3, verse 3, though fear had come upon them because of the people of those countries, they set the altar on its bases, and they offered burnt offerings on it to the Lord, both the morning and evening burnt offerings. So opposition had kicked in. This is the work of God in that time. God has commissioned them to come back and rebuild the temple in the city of Jerusalem. They've come back and they've begun a rebuilding. They've set up the altar and the community is beginning to develop, but the surrounding people are in opposition. They don't want this to happen. And they began to put fear in the Jews who had returned. But at this point, in spite of fear, they set up the system of worship. Verses 4 and 5. They also kept the Feast of Tabernacles, as it is written, and offered the daily burnt offerings in the number required by ordinance for each day. Afterward, they offered the regular burnt offering, and those of the new moons, and for all the appointed feasts of the Lord that were consecrated, and those of everyone who willingly offered a free will offering to the Lord. So the system of worship was reestablished. They're keeping the feast. They're making the sacrifices. They're doing what God has commanded them to do in the Scriptures. So they began these things, and it talks about the rebuilding of the seventh month, the things that they did, and the setting up of things once again. And then we go down to let's go down to verse 10. When the builders laid the foundation of the temple of the Lord, the priests stood in their apparel with trumpets, and the Levites and the sons of Asaph with cymbals to praise the Lord, according to the ordinance of King David, king of Israel. And they sang responsively, praising and giving thanks to the Lord, for he is good, for his mercy endures forever toward Israel. Then all the people shouted with a great shout when they praised the Lord, because the foundations of the house of the Lord was laid. So they laid the foundation. That was laid after about a year and a half after their return. So they were able to get the foundation laid and get things going. And there was a great shout of joy as this was all being undertaken. Verse 12, but many of the priests and Levites and the head of the fathers' houses, old men, who had seen the first temple, wept with a loud voice when the foundation of this temple was laid before their eyes. Yet many shouted aloud for joy. So there were mixed emotions as they were beginning this rebuilding process. Because some of the people that had returned to Jerusalem and saw what was being done with the rebuilding of the temple said, you know what? We remember the way it used to be. We remember the magnificence of the Temple of Solomon. That was all destroyed. And we look at what's being rebuilt, it's shoddy in comparison. It's like having a fine house and we're rebuilding it with a shack. In that sense, they grieved. But in the sense that God was allowing them to reestablish the true worship of God, they did rejoice in that. Verse 13, so that the people could not discern the noise of the shout of joy from the noise of the weeping of the people. For the people shouted with a loud shout, and the sound was heard afar off as they began this rebuilding. So they're not going to rebuild a magnificent temple. They're going to build a temple that's going to be simple, that in many ways is inferior to the original temple. So the foundation of the temple is laid. 70 years have passed as prophesied by Jeremiah and Ezekiel, but they can rejoice in the fact that they again have a spiritual home. Let's go to chapter 4. Chapter 4. So as they're going about this work and they're rebuilding the temple, Satan's not happy with what's going on there. And Satan inspires adversaries to rise in order to stop the rebuilding of the temple. So the adversaries rise up. One of the adversaries, his name was Sanballat, and others rose up in order to thwart the rebuilding of the temple. Let's go to chapter 4, verse 1. Now when the adversaries of Judah and Benjamin heard that the descendants of the captivity were building the temple of the Lord God of Israel. So they're rebuilding the temple. They hear about it. They came to Zerubbabel and the heads of the fathers' houses and said to them, let us build with you, for we seek your God as you do, and we have sacrificed to him since the days of Esarhaddon, king of Assyria, who brought us here. So you have to realize these are adversaries, and their goal is to infiltrate the work that God is doing and sabotage it from within. Their goal is to stop this work. They don't begin by sending an armed force of soldiers. No, they're trying to infiltrate and sabotage things from within. So they're seeking to thwart this effort to rebuild the temple of God. And they're basically saying, hey, we worship the same God. We're all on the same page here. But as you look at the facts, they were brought in by the Assyrians, and they did bring a priest back in order to receive instructions about how to worship God, but it was a mixture of paganism and the true religion. And that's, God says that's unacceptable. It's got to be all or nothing. You can't compromise. You can't allow a mix of true religion and false religion to be the way you approach me. Verse 2, so they came to Zerubbabel and the heads of the fathers' houses and said to them, let us build. And then Zerubbabel and Jeshua and the rest of the heads of the fathers' houses said to them, you may do nothing with us to build a house for our God, but we alone will build to the Lord God of Israel as King Cyrus, the king of Persia, has commanded us. So they said, thank you, but no thank you. We don't want you to be involved in this. They probably could see that these individuals were going to try to undermine the work of God and thwart it from being done. And so we alone will build this as authorized by the king of Persia. Then the people of the land tried to discourage the people of Judah. They troubled them in building. They didn't want this to be built. And as you think about, the work of God over the years, God tells you that one of the truths is that God sows good seed, in his field. But what does that parable about the sower tell us? That it tells us that along comes Satan and he sows the tares. And the tares look just like the regular crop of grain, and you can't tell the difference. And that's something that the church has always had to deal with, is individuals coming in who appear to be Christians but in reality are not, and in fact tend to undermine the work of God. Satan's quite adept at that, and he uses people to undermine God's people and his work, and he's always done it and seems like he always will. He seeks to frustrate their building. So they're not able to make much progress with this to keep the people from building. But they continue to trouble them in building, and so they're not able to stop them, so where do they turn? The same place people do today. Verse 5. Again, sorry for picking on attorneys here, but anyway, it says they hired counselors. The lawyers got involved. They hired counselors against them to frustrate their purpose all the days of Cyrus, king of Persia, even until the reign of Darius, king of Persia. So they hired individuals to go before the king and make their plea to stop what was going on here, to stop God's work. So they posed legal challenges, and they just wore the people down. People began to get weary. And what happened to them as they wore them down? They eventually said, you know what? That's enough. We're just going to go back to our own homes, our own projects, and our own businesses. And by the time the new king, Darius, came on the scene, there was not a lot going on with the temple, even though it was still under construction. Not much was happening. The work ground to a halt. So the name Darius or Darius is one of those confusing names that we find on a list of Persian kings. It was probably Xerxes I, who was the Persian king that was being addressed here. He was the first of the family known as the Darius kings, the king who came on the scene after Cyrus died. And he was probably unaware of the motivation Cyrus had to rebuild Jerusalem and the temple. Chapter 4, verse 6. In the reign of Ahasuerus, and Ahasuerus is a title meaning great king of Persia, and so it is a title more than the name of a king. In the beginning of his reign, they wrote an accusation against the inhabitants of Judah and Jerusalem. In the days of Artaxerxes, also Bishlam, Mithridath, Tabal, and the rest of the companions wrote to Artaxerxes, king of Persia. And the letter was written in Aramaic script and translated into the Aramaic language. Reum, the commander, and Shimshi, the scribe, wrote a letter against Jerusalem to King Artaxerxes. So they're writing letters, and they're seeking to thwart the rebuilding of the temple. Let's go to verse 11. And this is the accusation that was made. This is a copy of the letter that they sent him. To King Artaxerxes, from your servants, the men of the region beyond the river, and so forth. Let it be known to the king that the Jews who came up from you have come to us at Jerusalem, and are rebuilding the rebellious and evil city, and are finishing its walls and repairing the foundations. They're seeking to rebuild God's temple, to reestablish the true worship of God. But how do the enemies of that work portray it? They portray it as rebellious and evil, and they seek to undermine it so it's never built. Let it now be known to the king that if this city is built and the walls completed, they will not pay tax, tribute, or custom. That would, of course, get the king's attention, since all kings love tax and tributes and all of those kinds of things. And the king's treasury will be diminished. Now, because we receive support from the palace, it was not proper for us to see the king's dishonor. So they're just acting honorably in the king's best interest. We're just looking out for your interest, dear king. And therefore we have sent and informed the king that search be made in the book of the records of your fathers, and you will find in the book of the records and know that this city is a rebellious city, harmful to kings and provinces, and that they have incited sedition within the city in former times, for which cause this city was destroyed. This city was destroyed because of rebellion. And yes, there were rebellions that took place here. And it was a difficult city to get along with at times. And so they are right in that. And we inform the king that if this city is rebuilt, and its walls are completed, the result will be that you will have no dominion beyond the river. So this is a threat to a portion of this king's empire. And so they're They get to him by bringing up the subject of taxation and tribute. It's going to impact his finances, and it's going to impact the extent of his empire. So they file this false accusation against the Jews. Verse 17, the king sent an answer to Rehum, the commander, to Shimshai the scribe, to the rest of their companions who dwell in Samaria, and to the remainder beyond the river, peace and so forth. The letter which you sent to us has been clearly read before me, and I give the command, and I gave the command, and a search has been made, and it was found that this city in former times has revolted against kings, and rebellion and sedition have been fostered in it. There have also been mighty kings over Jerusalem who have ruled over the region beyond the river, and tax, tribute, and custom were paid to them. Now give the command to make these men cease, that this city may not be built until the command is given by me. Take heed now that you do not fail to do this. Why should damage increase to the hurt of the kings? So he replies, and he causes the work to be stopped. He gives them authorization to stop what's done there. And we see this in our time as somebody begins to build a project, and somebody files a environmental seeks them to make an environmental study or some objection to whatever they're doing. There's a little fish or a little lizard or some bird that's dwelling there. The turtles can't cross the road there, or whatever it may be, and they stop the project until it can be investigated, and sometimes it's stopped for good. And that's what was a similar type situation was taking place here. Now when the copy of King Artaxerxes' letter was read before Rehum, Shimshai the scribe, and their companions, they went up in haste to Jerusalem. Oh boy, we get to stop this work in Jerusalem. To Jerusalem against the Jews, and by force of arms made them cease. So they brought up the edict from the king, and they came up and exerted force to stop them from building. Thus the work of the house of God, which is at Jerusalem, ceased, and it was discontinued until the second year of the reign of Darius, king of Persia. So the work stopped. They were about a third of the way done, and everything came to a halt. The work was stopped, and the people as they stopped them, the people lost confidence. They went back to their homes and families and farms. However, God had a prophecy that this temple would be finished in 70 years. He said it would be done. But it didn't look like it was going to be done at this point. It looked like it had come to a grinding halt. And sometimes as you look at this particular situation and you apply it to our current situation, we see that Christ, for those of us that have been in the church since the 60s or the 70s or 80s or whatever, we've heard for a long, long time that Christ would return. Where is he? Where is the promise of his coming? And you can come to the conclusion, people, when is this going to happen? And it's very easy for us to come to the same conclusion that the people of Judah came to. The work is stopped. We'll get on with our lives. And we can lose our focus. And instead of focusing upon the work that God has for us to do individually and collectively, we can stop. And so we can be building our own house, be working on our own projects, be focused on our own selfish interest, which may not be bad, but if we neglect the work of God to be about our own interest, then we've lost sight of what really matters and what's really significant. And see, the people here were discouraged. And we as individuals and as a church, we go through things that are discouraging. Where we feel like, I don't need this. Why should I continue to be a part of this? Why put my heart and soul into something that keeps being thwarted? But just like the temple that they were building at that time, God said it would be built in 70 years. And what we'll see as we go through this study is that God's temple is going to be built. And this temple that seems to be inferior here is really a superior temple, because it's the temple to which Jesus Christ is going to come. And so as we think about it in its application to you and me, we are the temple. And you think about the condition of the church, the temple of God at this time. Look at this room. We can't even fill it. It's kind of sad. So you can say, well, this is inferior. But you have to look beyond the immediate and see what God is doing. He dwells in us individually and collectively. And He is creating a temple, block by block and piece by piece, that will be more glorious than any temple that has ever existed. And that temple will one day, there will be a glorious physical temple in the city of Jerusalem. But that's not going to be the focus. The real glory is God and all of the saints who will dwell there. They are the temple. And people will look and say, wow, this is magnificent. These people were human beings at one time, and now they're spirit beings. And they serve Jesus Christ. So you have to look beyond the immediate and the hurts and the sorrows and the pains and the aches and the setbacks and difficulties that we face to see something magnificent that is coming. And that's what's being brought out here in the book of Ezra and in the book of Zechariah and the book of Haggai that we'll go through here in the future. But let's go to chapter 5 and look at verse 1 and set the stage for looking at Zechariah and Haggai. Verse 1, so they stopped the work. They stopped the work. And God said, I don't want it to stop. It's going to be finished. I said it would be, and it will be. So He raised up prophets in chapter 5, verse 1. Then the prophet Haggai and the prophet Zechariah, the son of Iddo, prophets prophesied to the Jews who were in Judah and Jerusalem in the name of the God of Israel who is over them. God raised up prophets to go to the people and to stir them up to complete the work. Verse 2 goes on to say, so Zerubbabel, the son of Shealtiel, and Jeshua, the son of Jozadak, rose up and began to build the house of God, which is in Jerusalem, and the prophets of God were with them, helping them. So we see here that the work of God has stopped, and then we see that it picks up again after Haggai and Zechariah come on the scene. So we have to ask, what did Haggai and Zechariah say? And what was the result of their prophecy? Well, they began to build the temple again. So for us to understand what's going on here between verse 1 of chapter 5 and verse 2, we see some tremendous things happening, but to understand it, we have to read the prophecies of Haggai and Zechariah and see why the mindset of the people changed. What brought these people back to work? What brought these leaders, Zerubbabel and Joshua, back to what they were supposed to be doing? What was said and what inspired them to get back with it? And we have these two prophets, Haggai and Zechariah, and they are the ones who give us the story of these two olive trees that symbolize the two witnesses. So you have to stop at verse 1, go read Haggai and Zechariah, and then come back to chapter 5, verse 2 in order to get the full story. So we'll now have to go over Haggai and Zechariah to pick up that story, and we'll do that next time. So we'll begin looking at Haggai and Zechariah, which is an interesting study, and hopefully you'll find that profitable. And you look at this and you see the magnificence of what God is doing, and we're all part of that. You are part of that temple that is being built.